What's up, YouTube? Zero here, and welcome to the place where gamers, witches, wizards, and superheroes unite. Today, I'm going to be giving my opinion on the CDL Scouting Series, what it was, why I believe it was a failure, and what it should have been. So before I get into it, I do want to say that if you do enjoy this video, feel free to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more Call of Duty content, a new Call of Duty video every morning, Monday to Friday at 8 a.m. So, what was the CDL Scouting Series? Well, it was, like it says, a scouting series. The league invited a bunch of amateur players, and when I say amateur, we're talking about players who just currently aren't associated with a CDL roster. So it could be former players such as Sensor, who has been a pro and on pro teams in the past, and Parasite. They were invited to play as well. So amateur just means, in this sense, players who are not associated with a pro team. And all of these players were invited, and it was supposed to be a 4-day event. And over the course each new day, each coach from each CDL team would draft a new team amongst the invited players, and they would just scrim each other. There was no official broadcast. The amateur players were allowed to stream if they wanted to. The coaches were streaming, and the coaches would be a part of the player chats so they could hear the comms and they could watch the amateur players play in these scrimmages. So that's essentially what it was, and when I say it was supposed to be 4 days, the fourth day actually got canceled because as the tournament, the scouting series was progressing, more and more amateur players felt as though really it was a waste of time. So that's part of the failure, is that a lot of amateur players after the first few days didn't feel like they were getting anything out of it. And the coaches were on the same wavelength. They also felt as though they weren't getting much out of it either, at least a lot of the coaches. And that's where I want to talk about why this was really a huge failure. And then I want to get into what I believe this should have been. So the timing was all wrong for the CDL Scouting Series. They put it on just a few weeks ago, where in December, the CDL is about to start next month. Almost, and Paris is kind of on the fence, every team is pretty much set. You have your starting roster. You're not going to replace a starter on your roster right before the season is about to begin, when your team has been practicing together for the last month and a half, 2 months. It just didn't make any sense from a timing perspective. Yeah, maybe one or two of these players could get picked up as a substitute, but really, if you're inviting however many it was, 160 players, what were the odds as a player that you were going to be picked up as a substitute? It was minimum to none. Really, as a player, from a player amateur perspective, it made more sense to just practice with your team and gear up for future tournaments, because that's where your money is going to be. Most likely, you're not going to be making any money as a substitute because there was a good chance you weren't going to get picked up as a substitute. So that was one of the reasons why this was a huge failure, as it was really just poor timing. If this was right after the CDL season had ended, maybe the rosters were starting to break up, and the coaches were more open to adding some of these amateur players to a CDL roster, that would have made more sense. But the timing was just completely wrong. On top of that timing, think about some of the rosters we have in the league. We have FaZe, who have Celium, Simp, Arcides, and Abizi. Optic, who have Scump, Formal, Dashi, and Envoy. I mean, a lot of these teams have players where they probably have a very long career ahead of them. So as a coach going into this season, you're not imagining replacing any of your players. So are you really getting much out of it, seeing how good some of these players are? Not really, because you're not going to replace any of them. Who's FaZe going to replace? Who's Optic Chicago going to replace? Probably no one. So it just didn't really make sense. It was poor timing, and it was one big mess from that perspective. So now let's talk about what I believe this should have been. Now, it was a CDL Scouting Series, but I believe it should have been an amateur player showcase for the fans, not for the league. If you're in the league, you already understand who some of the top amateur talent is. But the fans don't. A lot of the fans who do watch the CDL really don't understand who the top amateur players are. And I'm going to be honest, I'm one of them. I know a few amateur players. Like I said before, we classify amateur as those who aren't associated with a CDL roster. So there are a bunch of former pros, Sensor, Parasite, GodRx, etc., who aren't associated with a team, who are amateurs, considered amateurs, so I know them, but I don't know any of the young up-and-coming talent. When Mac and Awakening came into the CDL last season, I had no idea who they were. I had no reason to be excited about these players coming into the league. The same with Hydra coming into the league this season. Now, I've heard a little bit about what Clayster has said about him, but outside of that, I have no idea who Hydra is. I don't know if I should be excited about him as a player or not. Think about sports leagues when some of the top young talent has come into those leagues. Think of the NBA when LeBron James came into the league. Think of the NHL when Ovechkin and Crosby came into the league. Even if you weren't a fan of the teams that drafted those players, you were still excited as a fan of the sport because of how good those players were hyped up and the potential those players had. That's what the CDL has to do better. They have to do better to hype their young amateur players, so when they do come into the league, there is a lot of excitement, even if you're not a fan of the team. Let's go back to the Paris Legion. Their official roster hasn't been announced. We have ideas as to what the roster is going to be. But could you imagine a team like Paris, who really doesn't have much hype around them right now, if they decided to sign one of the top amateur talents, and this top amateur talent, for example, was hyped up to be the LeBron James of the CDL? There's going to be a lot of excitement around that player, and even Paris, who has one of the smaller fan bases and really hasn't been engaging much on social media, there would still be excitement around the Paris Legion if the amateur talent was hyped up, if they signed that player and the player was coming into the league. And fans who aren't even fans of Paris Legion would be more willing to watch the Legion games because an amateur player was being hyped up. So that's what it should have been. It should have been a showcase for the fans so we could get to know some of the great amateur talent that could be coming into the league within the next few years. So we are coming down to the end of the video. I do have about a minute left. So let me know what you think in the comments section. Did you watch any of the showcase, the scouting series? What did you think about it? Let me know in the comments section. Do you agree that it should have been a showcase for the fans? Let me know what you think about my opinion. Well, until next time, peace.